In the heart of the eastern mountains, where the whispers of the wind carry the echoes of ancient monks, there lies a timeless truth. Life, in its purest form, is meant to flow like water. It bends, yields, adapts, and moves forward. Yet in the noise of the modern world, we fight the current, build dams of ego, and sink in resistance. This story is inspired by the wisdom of the Buddha and the sacred rivers that mirror his teachings. Through the journey of a young seeker named Anuvrat, you'll uncover how letting go doesn't mean losing, it means rising. It is not the weak who surrender, it is the wise who align themselves with the divine flow. Let the current take you deep. The path begins now. The morning mist rose gently from the mountains as the first light of dawn touched the surface of the Yamantara River, a sacred stream flowing through the ancient village of Mokshatam. It was said that the river had flowed uninterrupted for over 1,000 years, weaving through the earth like a silver thread, carrying not just water but stories, teachings, and truths whispered by the awakened ones. In this village lived a young man named Anuvrat, born to a potter's family, quiet and contemplative by nature. While his friends dreamed of wealth, adventure, or fame, Anuvrat was drawn to the mystery of stillness. He spent his mornings beside the river, watching it flow, wondering how something so soft could carve through mountains. His father often called him foolish. "Why do you sit by the river all day, boy? Do you think it will give you answers? You should be at the wheel, shaping clay like your brothers." But Anuvrat knew, deep within, that there was something the river could teach him. He just didn't know what it was yet. The silent invitation. One morning, Anuvrat met Bhante Ravit, an elderly monk who had returned to the village after decades of silence in the forest monastery of Rishigiri. The monk sat beside him and asked, "What do you see in the river?" Anuvrat replied softly, "I see movement, grace, patience. It yields, but it also shapes." Bhante Ravit smiled. "You are beginning to see with more than your eyes." That one sentence changed the course of Anuvrat's life. From that day, he began visiting Bhante Ravit daily. Sometimes they would speak, but often they simply watched the river together in silence. One day, Bhante Ravit posed a question. Which is stronger, the rock or the river? Anuvrat thought for a long time and answered, "The rock is stronger. It's solid, unmoving." The monk nodded but said nothing. A week later, he asked again, "Which is stronger, the rock or the river?" This time, Anuvrat hesitated. He remembered how certain rocks by the riverbank had eroded over time, how cliffs had been worn into smooth curves. He said slowly, "Maybe the river. It moves, but it changes everything." The monk chuckled. "Now you are beginning to understand the nature of true strength." The weight of control. Anuvrat lived in a home where control was mistaken for discipline. His father, though hard-working, was harsh and rigid. Everything had to be in order: meals at a fixed hour, prayers at dawn, work before rest. The pottery wheel was to be used precisely as taught, never deviating from the method of his ancestors. Anuvrat struggled with this rigidity. While he respected the art, he felt no life in it. He wanted to mold freely, let his hands explore new forms, experiment with shapes. But each time he tried, his father scolded him. "This is not how a pot is made. You are wasting the clay." It pained him, not because he disliked his father, but because he felt suffocated, like water trapped in a jar. That night, he walked to the river, where Bhante Ravit sat as usual. "I want to express myself," Anuvrat said, "but I feel imprisoned by control." The monk pointed to the river. "Look at it. It never asks for permission to flow. It doesn't resist the rocks. It simply moves around them. That is the way of life. To live, you must stop clinging to how things should be, and instead, let them be as they are." Anuvrat asked, "But what if everything collapses if I stop controlling things?" The monk smiled gently. "Then let it collapse. The things that fall apart when you stop controlling them were never yours to hold in the first place. Letting go. The first trial. The first trial of surrender came unexpectedly. One day, a fire broke out in the storage room where Anuvrat kept his pottery. Months of delicate work were reduced to ash. His father shouted in anger, blaming Anuvrat for being careless. The young man stood silently, grief burning in his chest like the flames that had consumed his art. That night, he went to Bhante Ravit and cried for the first time in years. "I lost everything." The monk placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Did you lose your hands?" "No." "Did you lose your vision, your skill?" "No." "Then you've lost nothing essential. What burned was not your craft. It was your attachment to the outcome." Bhante Ravit then gave him a small cup of water and asked him to hold it steadily without spilling a drop. At first, Anuvrat held it confidently, but as the minutes passed, his hand began to tremble. His muscles ached. The water spilled. The monk said, "Holding on to even a small thing for too long causes suffering. You must learn to let go." The story of the leaf. A few days later, Bhante Ravit took Anuvrat to a hidden spring deep in the forest. There, the river was narrow and fast. The monk dropped a dry leaf into the current. "Watch." The leaf danced, swirled, got stuck against a rock, and then eventually, gently, flowed around it. This leaf has no mind, no will, yet it flows better than most men. Why? Because it does not resist. Anuvrat began to weep, not out of sadness, but because he saw his own struggle in that leaf. He had been trying to control everything, his art, his future, even his thoughts. But water does not control. It moves. It adapts. It survives. A visit from the stranger. That evening, as Anuvrat returned home, he saw a man sitting at the village temple steps. His robes were dirty, his face scarred, and his eyes tired. Yet he had a powerful presence. Curious, Anuvrat offered him food. The man introduced himself as Ashmat, a former soldier turned wanderer. He had seen war, death, betrayal, and had come to the mountains in search of peace. "You seem peaceful," Ashmat observed. "I'm learning to be," Anuvrat replied. Ashmat laughed. "I spent years fighting. Thought control was strength. But the moment I put down my sword, I began to heal." The two spoke long into the night. Ashmat shared how he had lost everything because he couldn't let go. His position, his pride, even his family. He looked into Anuvrat's eyes and said, "Whatever you're holding on to, let it go before it becomes your prison." That night, Anuvrat had a dream. He stood by a mighty dam, struggling to keep it from breaking. Water surged, cracks appeared. He screamed, "I must hold it back." Then he heard Bhante Ravit's voice, "Let it go." He stepped aside. The dam burst, but instead of destruction, the water flowed peacefully into fields, reviving the dry soil. He awoke, trembling. A new beginning. Anuvrat began changing his life. He stopped arguing with his father, not out of defeat, but out of understanding. He let his art flow naturally, allowing imperfection and intuition to guide him. He forgave a friend who had betrayed him years ago. He even stopped planning his future obsessively and simply focused on his practice, his presence, and his peace. People in the village noticed the change. Some mocked him, others admired him. But Anuvrat didn't mind. He had become like the river, flowing, not forcing. Bhante Ravit, proud of his student's progress, gifted him a small scroll with a simple verse. The water doesn't fight the stone. It surrounds it, embraces it, and moves on. Anuvrat now carried those words in his heart. The monsoon arrived earlier than usual that year. Thick gray clouds painted the sky, and the Yamantara River, once calm and quiet, roared with newfound energy. Trees swayed in surrender, and the village of Mokshadam, nestled between hills and forest, readied itself for the season of unpredictability. For Anuvrat, The change in weather reflected the turbulence within his own heart. Though he had begun walking the path of letting go, a deeper challenge awaited him, one that no monk, river, or verse could help him escape from unless he was ready to look within. A visitor from the past one afternoon, soaked from the rain, Anuvrat returned from the forest to find a familiar face standing at his doorstep. His name was Kirit, his elder cousin, once a brother figure, now a bitter reminder of betrayal. Years ago, Kirit had stolen from Anuvrat's father during a family dispute and fled. He hadn't been seen since. Now there he was, drenched, thin, and carrying only a small cloth bag and lowered eyes. Anuvrat's father stormed out at the sight of him. "You dare return after what you did? You're no longer part of this family." But Kirit didn't flinch. He looked only at Anuvrat. "I'm not here for acceptance," he said. "I'm here for peace." Anuvrat felt his chest tighten. His heart beat with the rhythm of anger, confusion, and fear. The storm outside mirrored the one within. He didn't respond. Instead, he walked past Kirit and made his way to the riverbank, where the rain had turned the peaceful flow into chaos. Pante Ravat was already there, sheltering under a tree, watching the floodwaters rise. "You look like the storm has entered you," the monk said softly. Anuvrat sat beside him, breath shaky. "I want to forgive, but I can't. I want peace, but I feel anger. It's like there are two of me, one that flows and one that resists." Pante Ravat nodded. "Even rivers face storms, Anuvrat. They overflow, swell, and even destroy, but they never stop flowing." He handed Anuvrat a stone and said, "Hold this and close your fist." Anuvrat obeyed. "Now carry it with you wherever you go. Eat with it, sleep with it, bathe with it." Anuvrat looked confused. "For how long? Until you realize what it's teaching you." The weight of holding on days passed. Anuvrat did as instructed. He held the stone, carried it everywhere. It wasn't heavy, but over time it became irritating. His palm ached. His fingers stiffened. He couldn't mold clay properly, couldn't rest comfortably, and even bathing became awkward. By the 5th day, he had enough. He stormed to the monastery and threw the stone at Pante Ravat's feet. "I can't do this anymore." The monk looked up with a serene smile. "And yet people carry the weight of resentment, shame, and pride for years and still ask why they feel heavy." Anuvrat stood still, stunned by the lesson. "Letting go is not a one-time act," Pante Ravat continued. "It is a decision made again and again, like choosing not to clench your fist after each thought of revenge." Anuvrat nodded slowly. That night, he returned home and sat beside Kirit, who still hadn't left. They didn't speak. They simply sat as the storm outside began to soften. There was a proud drop of water who declared, "I am the greatest wave in the ocean." The other drops laughed. The wind came, lifted it, and smashed it against the shore. The wave disappeared, but the drop was never destroyed. It returned to the ocean. In becoming nothing, it became everything. Anuvrat whispered to himself, "To flow, I must first disappear." He bowed deeply, not to the monk, but to the river, to the sky, to the life that was teaching him through every breath. A conversation in the dark. Later that week, he invited Kirit to walk with him to the forest spring. They walked in silence. The rain had stopped, but the earth was still soft and fragrant. When they reached the spring, Anuvrat finally spoke. "Why did you come back?" Kirit looked down, ashamed. "I ran from everything. I thought I'd find peace in the world, but it only comes from facing what you fled from." "And the theft?" Kirit didn't defend himself. "I was young, angry, and greedy. I have no excuse. I'm not asking for forgiveness, only a chance to live without lying anymore." Anuvrat stared at the spring water. "You stole from my father," he said, "but what hurt more was that you didn't trust me enough to come clean." Kirit nodded. "I know." They sat together for hours. No apologies, no arguments, just the presence of two men acknowledging their brokenness. When they returned home, Anuvrat told his father, "Let him stay. If he has to redeem himself, let him do it where his mistakes were made." His father resisted at first, but the softened tone in Anuvrat's voice silenced any protest. The monk's disappearance. A few days later, Pante Ravit left the village without a word. Only a scroll was left in Anuvrat's hut, tied with a thread of dried river grass. It read, "The river must flow without the hand of the teacher. You are ready. Trust the current." Anuvrat felt both loss and freedom. He wanted to hold on, but he knew now that would only weigh him down. The test of stillness. Months passed. The rains ended. The river calmed. Life moved on. Anuvrat's pottery became more sought after, not because it was perfect, but because each piece felt alive. He molded not with rules, but with rhythm. Kirit worked in silence, slowly earning the trust of the villagers again. Anuvrat began offering morning teachings by the riverbank, not as a monk, not as a guru, but as a friend sharing the wisdom he had received. One day a young girl named Pia, troubled by anxiety, asked him, "How do I stop the storms in my mind?" Anuvrat took her to the river. He pointed to a leaf floating gently on the surface. "Watch it." They stood in silence as the leaf floated, got caught in a small swirl, then broke free and continued. Did the leaf fight the swirl? Pia shook her head. Did it stop flowing? No. That's the way. Don't fight the storm. Don't resist the swirl. Let it pass through you. Your job is to remain afloat. Becoming the water. That night, Anuvrat sat by the river, alone, his reflection dancing in the ripples. He thought of Bhantaravit, of Ashmat, of Kirit, of every moment that had threatened to break him. He whispered to the stars, "I no longer wish to control my life. I only wish to understand it, to be one with it, like water is with the riverbed." And in that moment, something inside him dissolved. A last stone rolled off the river of his spirit. He felt weightless, not because he had no burdens, but because he finally knew. He was not the burden carrier. He was the flow. The days grew cooler as autumn crept silently into the village of Mokshadam. The leaves turned golden, the river ran clear and calm, and the villagers began preparing for the harvest season. But for Anuvrat, this season marked something deeper. Not the end of the rains, but the completion of his spiritual storm. He had become known in the village not as a guru, but as someone who lived differently, peacefully, gently, with presence. People came to him with problems, but he didn't offer answers. He offered stillness, and in that stillness many found their own solutions. But peace, he would soon learn, is not something you achieve once and for all. Peace is a practice. Just like the river must keep flowing, even after the rains have passed. A new seeker arrives. One misty morning, a young woman arrived at the village. She wore a blue robe and had the quiet poise of someone who had seen suffering. Her name was Samika, and she came from the far-off town of Valmyra, known for its war-scarred past and restless present. Word had reached her of a potter who spoke like a monk and lived like water. When she met Anuvrat, she asked him just one question. Can a person truly be free in a world full of noise? He answered, only if the freedom comes from within. The noise outside cannot disturb the one who is quiet inside. She stayed, not in his home, but in a small hut near the river. And every day she listened, not to teachings, but to silence, to water, to birds, to her breath. Anuvrat saw her walk the same path he once had, confusion, resistance, then surrender. In her he saw a reflection of his younger self, but he did not guide her, he simply let her flow. A challenge of choice. One evening Samika came to him trembling. My family has written to me. They want me to return and help with rebuilding our land. They say I've changed, that I'm becoming distant. Anuvrat understood. The path of awakening often leads away from comfort, and sometimes away from those we love. "Do you feel called to go back?" he asked. "I don't know," she whispered. "I'm afraid. If I return, I may lose this peace. But if I stay, I may abandon those who need me." Anuvrat said, "Water never stays still for long. If it does, it stagnates. Sometimes flowing means returning, not retreating." She looked into his eyes. "And what if I lose myself again?" He answered, "You can never lose what you've truly understood. Peace is not a place. It's a way of being." The next morning, she left with gratitude in her eyes and a river in her heart, the mirror of the mountain. With Samika gone, Anuvrat felt an unexpected emptiness. Though he had no attachment, her presence had reminded him of how far he had come. He decided to take a solitary journey, farther into the mountains, beyond even where Bhante once meditated. He carried nothing but a blanket, dried fruit, and a simple prayer. "May I dissolve whatever still remains of me." He walked for 3 days, encountering silence deeper than he had ever known. The trees no longer whispered. Even the river was a distant memory. It was just him, the sky, and the vastness. There, in the hollow between two cliffs, he sat in meditation. He remembered his past, the control, the fear, the resistance, the anger, the ego, the love, the longing. All of it arose like waves. But he didn't fight them. He let them pass. He had become the water now,